Our third judge this year is the distinguished attorney Neil Katyal, who is a professor of law at Georgetown and a partner at Hogan Lovells and has argued 37 cases before the Supreme Court and consistently been recognized as one of the top attorneys and commentators on legal issues. He was an active member of the judges' deliberations this year, and particularly pleased that the winners he advocated for in both the law and lifetime achievement categories were chosen. Unfortunately, Neil has had a personal family emergency and is not able to be here tonight, but he has sent me the remarks that he wrote, and so I am going to be reading Neil's remarks to honor Ted Boutros, who is this year's First Amendment Award winner in the law category. Ted. I have the distinct honor this evening of introducing Ted Boutros. Ted is an outstanding colleague and appellate advocate who is being honored tonight for his tireless defense of freedom of speech and of the press. Ted has been a First Amendment champion throughout his long career, over which he has argued more than 100 appeals, including many arguments before the Supreme Court, arguments in 12 U.S. courts of appeals, and various ones before state Supreme Courts. This long career has earned him many accolades, including being listed as one of the 100 most influential lawyers in America by the National Law Journal, and being consistently labeled a leading lawyer by both Chambers and Legal 500. While Ted has been a leading advocate of the First Amendment for many decades, his skills as a 1A defender have come into particularly high demand lately, as we grapple with a president who spurns the press and seeks to intimidate his critics into silence. Ted has been at the forefront of this crisis, blocking Trump's attempts to trample the First Amendment at every turn. Recently, Ted represented CNN reporter Jim Acosta, whose White House press credentials were revoked after some critical questioning of the president. Ted sued Trump and other White House officials and eventually got Acosta's press credentials restored in a critical win for freedom of the press. This suit headed off a blatant attempt by President Trump to condition access to the White House on positive reporting on the administration. Ted made it clear that this kind of behavior is not welcome in a liberal democracy, and that the United States continues to be a country where the press is free to criticize those who hold power in our government. Ted has defended not just media organizations, but ordinary people who seek to criticize the president. He has promised to defend pro bono anyone who is sued by the president for exercising their First Amendment rights. Those who perform a public service by bringing to light inappropriate or even criminal behavior by our president deserve a vigorous defender of their First Amendment freedoms, and they can rest assured that they have that in Ted Boutros. Now Ted wears many hats: partner at an elite law firm, Supreme Court orator, First Amendment advocate. But one of my favorite titles is Twitter freak. Ted's Twitter addiction is almost as bad as mine. But in all seriousness, Ted takes seriously his commitment to the democratization of information, engaging with the latest questions of First Amendment rights publicly and in real time. Ted understands that the First Amendment is a pillar without which our democracy would have fallen long ago, and that it remains a critical tool against the corrupt and self-interested who work in our government today. He is meeting the challenges of our times with all he's got, and that is why we are proud to introduce him as a recipient of this year's First Amendment Award in Law. Ted.
Thank you so much, Christy, and thank you, Neil. I mean, it means a lot coming from Neil. He's a wonderful lawyer. Thank you to the foundation for this award. And I want to thank my colleagues at Gibson Dunn who worked with me on the matter: Ted Olson, Josh Lipschutz, Annie Champion, who I think is here, and Aaron Smith, one of our associates, and the folks at CNN and AT&T and Jim Acosta. It takes a lot to sue the President of the United States, and we had to think about it carefully. But I think when Sam Feist, the bureau chief, saw the caption "CNN versus Trump," he actually was very happy. It made his day. I also want to congratulate my fellow honorees. It's such an incredibly impressive group. These students actually, as you said, give me hope and inspire me. And the other honorees were amazing, and it's particularly nice to be here with the great Floyd Abrams getting the Lifetime Achievement Award, because you've led us on First Amendment battles for so many years, and thank you. This award has special meaning for me in terms of getting it right now, because we're in both an especially dangerous time for First Amendment values, and yet journalism is thriving. When you think about it, it's enough to make your head spin. On the one hand, there's been an explosion of speech in journalism over the last decade as a result of amazing technological developments like Twitter and other platforms that provide the biggest megaphone in world history. We have more speech than ever before, so that's good. But at the same time, the First Amendment is under attack in this country, led by none other than the President of the United States, who has been taking full advantage of his First Amendment rights and his presidential bully pulpit and his Twitter account to try to squelch freedom of speech and of the press at every turn. And this is not a political statement by me. The president has been very explicit about what he's doing. He enjoys it. He is proud of it. So that's the environment that we confront. Among other things, President Trump has declared that we should open up the defamation laws to make it easier for famous, powerful figures to sue news organizations and private citizens for making critical statements about him. And he knows full well that the threat of lawsuits alone can chill speech and can chill news reporting. He's repeatedly threatened to sue private citizens and news organizations for defamation, both before, during, and after the election for the presidency. He has incessantly branded journalists to be the enemy of the people, as we all know, who are purveyors of fake news. He's essentially engaging in a disinformation campaign intended to confuse the American citizenry. President Trump's words and actions, among other factors, have contributed to a climate of hostility and even violence towards the press. Journalists have been verbally abused and harassed online and in person, physically assaulted, subjected to death threats, and targeted with pipe bombs and murdered in this country. In short, an ill wind is blowing in the face of freedom of speech and of the press, even as it flourishes as never before. That brings me to my clients, Jim Acosta and CNN. As part of President Trump's campaign, many of you have probably seen, he often directs his attacks specifically towards Jim Acosta and CNN. And things came to a head at a press conference on November 7, the day after the midterm elections. And it was in the East Room of the White House, and Jim Acosta asked perfectly appropriate, newsworthy questions about an issue of the day, immigration. And in response, President Trump called him a rude, terrible person and reiterated his fake news and enemy of the people epithets. And that evening when Jim went back to work, for White House correspondents, the White House is where they work. That's their office. They basically have their own workspace. When Jim went back to work that night, the security guard informed him that his press credentials, his hard pass as it's known as, had been revoked, and that he confiscated the hard pass. So Jim had to just leave. CNN tried to work it out with the White House and tried to, again, not precipitate a lawsuit. And similar things had happened to reporters before from CNN and BuzzFeed and the New York Times, but nothing quite this dramatic. And the White House basically stiff-armed CNN, did not respond to inquiries and efforts to resolve it, so we decided to sue. And as I said, we knew it was a big deal. Suing the President of the United States is important. If we're going to sue, we needed to win. There was very little law on the subject, but luckily the one case about White House press credentials, Sherrill versus Knight, directly supported our position. So when the Justice Department said they've only got one case, and I said, yeah, and it directly supports us, so we should win, that was helpful. But we also knew that this wasn't just about Jim Acosta and CNN. If the White House could do this to them, it could do it to any news organization and any reporter. And the whole point of freedom of the press is to get information to the American people so that they can govern themselves in our democracy. The whole point of the First Amendment is so the American people, with the press as their surrogates, can scrutinize and criticize and challenge the most powerful figures in our country. We can't allow the president to pick and choose the news We can't allow the president to censor reporters because he doesn't like their questions or because he thinks they're rude. And as I argued at the emergency hearing the day after we filed the lawsuit, the rudest person in that press conference was President Trump. There was no question about it, and it was perfectly fine. It's the rough and tumble of journalism. I mean, there's some great journalists here. But Brian asked a question during that. You got into it with them too, and so that's part of the First Amendment is the back and forth. But we can't have the president and the White House targeting reporters that they don't like. 2 days later, we won. The district court ordered that Mr. Acosta's hard pass be immediately restored. The court found, based on this case I mentioned, Sherrill versus Knight, that Jim had a First Amendment liberty interest to his press pass because the White House had opened itself up to reporters, which is a great thing, that the White House, that the president's house is open to reporters, and there's a White House press room, and that's a tradition we have to protect. And the court held that given that the White House had opened itself up to reporters, you couldn't take that press credential away under the Due Process Clause without a fair process with notice, opportunity to be heard. And so the court ordered that the press pass be restored, and Jim was back within an hour of court, back in the White House reporting. So it was a great day and an important victory, but the battle goes on, as you all know. President Trump continues to attack the press, and just last week the White House instituted a new press credentialing process that is in some ways nonsensical, but it's also open to all sorts of subjectivity that I think creates great dangers for freedom of the press. That's why events like this are so important. We need to both celebrate the First Amendment and fight to protect it every single day. Thank you so much for this award.